So I've seen a lot of takes that are basically along the lines of something like Lelouch isn't smart. From everyone around him is just stupid, to plot contrivances, to he's able to plan, which means he isn't smart, to he's just manipulating people and Geass does all the work. There's a lot of excuses people have made to try and reason that Lelouch isn't smart. Now I think that there's some truth in these. I think there's some where you can definitely look at them and say, this is a flaw, but none of Lelouch. I think Code Geass makes up for a lot of its shortcomings with some of its epic moments and how well Lelouch is traditionally done, not in being smart, but as just being one of the best and, fan favorite characters we've ever seen. It makes up for a lot of things it's very, very terrible at in that way. The cast is very oversaturated. The comparison between the school elements and the taking over the world elements are jarring at best. A lot of the school episodes are very weak and just simple, not engaging in any way compared to what the rest of the anime is. I know a lot of people lost it because of those school elements, and I could probably make a whole video talking about why those don't work, even if I understand the thematic relevance in the character elements to Lelouch, where he's really just a guy still. I think it's unfair to say he's not smart, so today we're going to bust those myths, for lack of a better phrase, and go over and make some counterpoints to the traditional arguments that Lelouch is stupid, or at least not smart. Now, you probably notice this video feels a little bit different than more recent ones. I'm doing this in a different style, which I think won't lead to a drop in quality, but will let me put out a few more videos. So not every video will be in this style where I'm just looking at an outline rather than a script, but if you notice a difference, let me know what you thought below, if I should continue this or not, because this is very much an experiment for us here. But anyway, let's actually get into things proper here. So one of the main arguments I see is that Lelouch isn't smart, it's just that everyone around him is very stupid. And a lot of times this is very true. I think there's something to be said that's not intentional, where the Black Knights seem very incompetent at times. A lot of their leadership, it's so Lelouch focused, and everyone is just there to make Lelouch look better for the most part, because he's the star of the show through and through, that there are definitely characters around him who aren't very intelligent, or come off as not very intelligent, because they were never given intelligent lines or intelligent actions, because those all went to Lelouch. So it's very easy to assume that he's not smart, everyone around him is just stupid. But I think we can look at some of the things he does and prove that that's just not true. So first, let's take an in-between point and look at his enemies. Now, the first person we see him face off against in a battle of wits, that is tactics, besides the opening chess match, we're not going to go over that, is with Clovis. Now, Clovis is very much supposed to be a terrible commander. He's a very quick character. He's there just to show the flaws of this Britannian family. That's his purpose in the story. He fulfills it and gets out of there. Lelouch comes in and wipes him out quite easily. And most of it is due to Clovis walking blindly into tactics and ambushes, or walking blindly into ambushes, having no tactics, just charging forward and trying to kill the enemy in this mentality of, I am Britannia, I am power. And Lelouch takes advantage of that. And that's where we start getting from his enemies are stupid, that's why he wins, into Lelouch is actually quite smart and using that to his advantage. Looking at just Clovis, let's keep in mind that Lelouch was still outnumbered for this. He was still working with a group of people he had no idea who they were. He had no idea of their exact capacities. He had just accidental into this situation and then taken command of it. He's still going against Britannia with just rebel forces and outdated technology. Even if he's going against a terrible commander, but that doesn't take away any of the power of those forces. They still have impressive nightmare technology that they are obliterating people with. And without Zero's leadership, all this attempt of the, I forget the exact name they were going by, I believe they might not have even had one, but Ogi and the rebels with Colin and everything, it was really just a suicide mission. It was just calling attention. It was pretty much, let's give our lives for this, because there's nothing else we have to live for. And Lelouch took that completely undermanned, underpowered, under-technologied situation and turned it into a win. Now, then we move forward to his next combat, which is very similar, but it's against Cornelia. Again, we don't really need to go over the situation because it's pretty much the same. Undermanned, under-technologied, except now he's against an actual decent commander. And this is where we start to see not that he's stupid, but that he's very stubborn, inexperienced, and to a degree arrogant as well, because he believes he's better than Britannia. So he doesn't do anything new. He tries these same stunts, and they fail because Cornelia has not just a good enough commander to recognize them, but likely knows that's how Clovis fell to them as well. So he doesn't come out on top against Cornelia, but to Lelouch's defense, a lot of his failure also depended on the desertion we see in that, where these rebels were not following his commands. They were acting on their own, they were fleeing their posts and not listening to his commands, and that's how he got stuck in that terrible situation, even though he was trying to pull the same stunt. I don't consider this as him being stupid. I consider it still as good tactics. He just didn't update them, and he's inexperienced. This is something we see in the fight against Clovis, is he's there shaking and nervous because he hasn't done this before. Chess is the closest thing he's done, and although they like to draw those visual parallels and those thematic parallels, you could say, to a degree, with treating it like a game, he just doesn't have an experience in this. He's just doing what's worked so far. But then continuing on with those battles against his own family, he also later on goes to draw against Cornelia when they are fighting at the Japan Liberations Front at the stronghold in the mountain, where they cause the landslide in episode 10. And this is where we get into another aspect of Lelouch, which is he's terrible at combat. He's using other people around him to facilitate a lot of his shortcomings, and we will get into that later. But what's important here is he outmaneuvers Cornelia specifically. Again, it's a draw, they retreat, everyone just kind of goes back to their corners, and there's not much of an end result here. But Cornelia herself was bested. Her nightmare was nearly destroyed, and without Suzaku there, she would have completely lost that fight rather than it being a draw. But it's important that they draw there because we see he's learning. He's not trying the same tactics again. He's taking advantage of information and the situation and even setting, the physicality of things around him. He had to study this mountain, use this technology, figure out how to execute this plan. He's basically a master of information, of looking at the situation around him and deciding how can I manipulate this to fit the conditions I need. I think it's very fitting that he says conditions, and that's something else we'll get into later. So I think it's a very smart draw on his win there because, again, he's very undermanned still. The Liberation Front is undermanned. He's undermanned, and Britannia obviously never will be. So again, the fact that he claws to a draw against a good commander is showing his improvement there. And then we reach the end of Season 1, where he finally fully bests Cornelia. It's not a full-scale war with them both fighting in it, as it has been before, but rather they go off to the side and have their kind of family event there. And that comes down to him using Geass to his advantage in that fight, and that's something else we'll touch on later. But what we see is, over time, he becomes a better commander, he becomes a better tactician, and bests even the people that bested him before. So it's not that he's stupid, he's just a little bit arrogant, a little bit stubborn, and inexperienced, and we see him progress through that over the course of the series. So I think we can cover there in terms of tactics, if we're considering that part of what makes him smart. We could consider Lelouch quite smart based on those. One of the second biggest things I see people mention for why Lelouch isn't smart in Code Geass is plot contrivances. He's not actually doing anything impressive. The writing was just lazy and gave him an easy out. Something happened that was completely off the walls, let him reset, or let him win the battle, or mitigated his loss in the battle. And that is a point that I cannot refute at all. I think that's one of the weaknesses of Code Geass that is very much propped up on the fact that Lelouch is such a good character, is a lot of things happen that just happen. Like whenever he's saved against Cornelia, C2 or CC just appears and saves him in an extra Zero outfit. They get transported to Island of the Gods, I forget the translation, because space laser reasons. CC gets the power to traumatize Suzaku because Geass is weird sometimes. And then there's just Rollo in general, who is pretty much the epitome of a plot contrivance. So I don't have anything to say for these. but I think that still looking at everything around them, and if we take those out of it, we can still look at Lelouch as smart. I don't think the plot having contrivances makes him not smart in any way. I think that's just ignoring a lot of the intelligent things he does throughout the series, and I don't think it's very fair to condemn his intelligence entirely based on a little bit of lazy plot writing in comparison to this amazing character. And to even go against my own argument here, I will mention that I think one of the stupidest things in Code Geass, and this is something Lelouch does, is erasing Shirley's memories. Now, I think this plays into Lelouch as a character, because he is very emotional. That's another one of his flaws, is he probably could have won much easier, much earlier, but he let his own desires, his own wishes, and his own emotions take over what he actually needed to do. And I have another video discussing why he should have lost that goes into those points if you'd like to check that out in the top corner now. And I think Shirley is kind of the epitome of that moment of the plot contrivances and his own weaknesses, because it just doesn't make sense. The fact that she goes back and they all accept, oh, she's playing a weird game where she acts like she doesn't know him, and then later on Jeremiah shows back up and he now has the ability to cancel Geass because the order of Geass, and she regains her memories. It's one of the worst parts of the show, and it being involved with the school side of things doesn't help at all. But so we're distinctly discarding those plot contrivances, looking around them, and I'm completely yielding to the fact that those do aid to his victory in some way. So I'm not refuting those at all. It's, again, one of the weaknesses of Code Geass. Something else I see said is he's not smart, he's just good at planning. And to me, that just comes down to a weird understanding. I mean, a lot of the videos that discuss this talk about Light from Death Note versus Lelouch. And all Light is really doing is planning as well. The way he deals with Ray Penbar is a plan. The way he deals with L when he reveals himself is a plan. Sometimes they're on the spot, but Light's just very good at playing the odds, knowing how things will play out. Basically reading cause and effect. That's what he does. That's planning. So I don't like that argument at all. I think it's like this weird semantics kind of thing there. But the ability to plan like that, especially as Lelouch does, is an amazing feat. We're just not shown it as in-depth as we are in Death Note. It's not the complete focus. But let's think about what he has to do for these plans. And I think one relevant aspect of this is the Zero Requiem and how, when in the series exactly that was planned. I think we can mitigate some of the plot convenience and some of these arguments by discussing that, but we will do that in a second here. But think about this. He has plans spanning months at times that cover everything from planning predicting the strategies of enemy commanders, from Clovis at the most basic, to Cornelia, who he even reads her moves when he loses. They just don't listen to him. His rebels don't listen to him, even though he's calling out everything she's doing. So he's very smart in that way. And then again, in R2 with the Federation and Jinkei, he calls out everything that they do and plans around everything that they do, even if it's very over-dramatized at a point. But he predicts pretty much everything that is thrown against him in terms of tactics throughout the series. That's one thing he's doing. He's also, getting back to one of the things we mentioned earlier, he surrounds himself with the best people to achieve these feats. I don't think that's a cop-out. I think one of the smartest things someone can do is surrounding themselves with people who can provide a different perspective and make up for what they lack in. He has Detard around because he can facilitate the propaganda side of things. He knows how to spin a narrative. He knows how to frame things. That helps Lelouch accomplish that task. I think that's very smart having him around. Todo is a great military commander. Lelouch is a tactician, a general. He's behind the scenes telling people where to go. Todo is there in the spot, in that one-on-one combat, and in that squad, telling people the exact specifics of what to do, the small details. He's very good at that, where Lelouch does the overall plan. That's smart, having him around. Rather than disposing of Colin when she almost figures him out, and I believe it's episode 3, we have the scene where he tries to use Geass on her twice. He keeps her around because he recognizes that he needs someone with that kind of skill in a nightmare. That's something he doesn't have. He's the worst fighter of anyone in all of Code Geass, even background characters. Lelouch sucks at combat. He only wins because he has good nightmares, and even then he still loses most of the time. So Lelouch recognizing that not disposing of her even when that would have made things easier, and crafting a plan to keep her around is very smart. Ogi is a very grassroots personal connection person. He was the inception of this rebellion, or one third to 1/4 of it. He has these connections with people. He's very warm and open. He holds that group together with some sort of like emotional fatherly energy. I think that's smart. That's good planning. That's good making up for your own shortcomings. That's one of the smartest things Lelouch does, is surrounds himself with the people he needs. But also getting back to why his plans are great, not only is he reading other enemy commanders and figuring out how to dictate these battles and everything else we've talked about, but at the same time, he's winning the hearts of the public. He's making this a narrative where he's sort of like a messiah figure, which again makes his acts even harder, because then he has to facilitate some sort of greater narrative going into them all and has to play them out in a very specific way. And I think this is where we can also start to dissipate some of those plot contrivances. There's a lot of times, and I think one of the best scenes we can look at, or best set of episodes, is when the Federation and Jinkei fight each other and Lelouch is fighting them. It's R2 about like 17 to 20. I'll put the correct numbers up on screen now for the episodes. But I think that's one of the best things where we see, like, so Jinkei's plan was, I'll release this dam, it'll flood them, they'll get washed away. Lelouch's plan, lowered the water level, it won't happen. But then it flips back to Jinkei because they start sinking into this sediment field. And then Lelouch is very shocked at this, retreats, and it looks very bad. Now, I think this is where the weakness of Code Geass' writing shows through, because I think that Lelouch planned for this. I think he would know this. He's the master of information. He specifically played environment to his advantage before. He's not going to fall to something like that. I think he's very good at acting like things are going terribly and making everyone, and maybe even himself, convinced that things are going to shit. We're going to lose this battle. Because that crafts the idea of the miracle worker, which from the inception of Zero and the Black Knights has been critical to who they are. It's what Detard jumps to his side for and the thing he pushes for all the time. They have to be seen as miracle workers for people to believe in them. That's the aspect of their hope and what really drives them forward. So I don't think that sometimes these are plot contrivances. I think it's very bad writing with a great plan by Lelouch. And that's a little bit meta of me to claim that it's good despite bad writing, but it's a stance I'm sticking with for Lelouch as a character as a whole. I just think he's very good at over-dramatizing everything to make things look like they're just barely working, because that's the narrative that's best for him. And this is, the next point is one you could claim, say he isn't smart in a certain, or I wouldn't even say not smart, because I think we have to look at smart as subjective as how intelligent he is being. I think that emotionally, Lelouch is a complete dumbass. And I think that makes him look very not smart, because we have to consider that during all this time as well, he's working around his own emotions in limiting conditions. From day one, he's limited himself more than his opponents have. Because at the end of the day, he has to keep Nunnally's safety as the #1 priority, and we see that backfire on him a lot of the time. He spares his family. That backfires on him a lot of the time. He never deals with Suzaku, even though he becomes part of the Zero Requiem. That comes back to haunt him all of the time. If he didn't limit himself, he would have crushed Britannia way earlier than we see. You could say it's not a smart idea to let these things persist and limit himself and be so emotionally stupid, but it doesn't mean that he's stupid. He's just made that bad decision. And in fact, having to work around them and still succeeding as he does shows how just intelligent he is to work around these self-limiting factors. This can come down to even simple examples. He refuses to take a victory handed to him by Schneisel in chess. He rushes off to save Nunnally at the end of Season 1, obviously. Or, having to deal with Yuffie as well. He limits himself. A stupid decision by a smart man. But in the same vein, he also does this to other people, or at least manipulates this in other people. He's not the only one limiting himself. Suzaku is, because he knows that Suzaku will not give in to terrible methods, as he would call them. He's not going to do things he views as morally wrong, and he plays that. That's what leads to the 1 million miracles moment, where they all put on the Zero costumes and all get exiled from Area 11. Because he knows Suzaku's not going to let another Yuffie moment happen. He wouldn't let that happen anyway. That again happens with Schneisel in the Jinkei and the Federation episodes. He knows that Schneisel is not going to push through and support people who are very terrible, as the leaders of the Federation prove themselves to be. So he knows he can push back through and win that fight because he's played his brother's limiting conditions. So not only does he do it himself, but he recognizes it in others as well. One of the next most common things is people saying he's only able to manipulate people. Again, I think this is a bit semantic because he's manipulating them in a smart way. I don't think manipulation negates intelligence in any way here. But he has the power to manipulate people to an extreme degree through Geass, and there is no counter-argument that a supernatural force assists him. Again, the same thing you could say in Death Note. Light without the Death Note is just a kid. He's smart, but he doesn't have that power. Same thing for Lelouch here. But he also has to, again, like Light, learn with, grow with, and test that power. He's able to recover when Colin almost discovers him, something we talked about before. We see, for a brief moment, he has one of his classmates go and put a tally mark on the wall every day, so we can see how long the effects of Geass last for, which is something he manipulates later with 2 of Cornelia's knights, whose names I'm forgetting at the exact moment. But that testing, that figuring out the exact limits of his power and playing that to advantage, is smart. That's part of being smart, is knowing who you are, knowing how to play it. Again, like surrounding himself with good people. He has to know these powers. So I don't think that them existing, again, mitigates his intelligence in any way. And not only that, and this kind of bridges out of smarts a little bit, but he's able to act and lie his way through all of this. Not just keeping a cool head when needed or acting worried when needed, but knowing when to do each of them. Again, knowing how people are going to react, knowing what fits the narrative best, knowing what his enemies will think of it the best. There's so many factors going into everything, even when it's just acting, that we have to consider that a smart act, because he's picking the best reaction for the situation and what he's going to act out. He shows doubt against Jinkei, which eventually leads him to push forward, gets him into the situation where he'll join their side. He has to remain calm against Nunnally because he can't break the narrative, even when it's the hardest thing he's ever had to do. Because he knows the conditions he set up, how to play them, and what he can't react to things with. His acting is another degree of his intelligence in that way. And even when he is using Geass for manipulation, Geass is kind of about setting the conditions right. I think that's why it's very fitting that how Lelouch describes things is all of the conditions have been met, or some variation of that said throughout the series. It's not as simple as say words and have it be done, because we've seen things like that backfire on him. Telling Suzaku to live, the Yuffie moment where he wasn't careful with his words, not being specific with Mao and that sort of genie in a bottle situation of you didn't pick your words exactly right, now you're going to pay the consequences. So we know that Geass can backfire on him, and he learns to work around that as the series progresses. So what Geass becomes in his manipulation through it is setting the conditions exactly right to achieve his end goal. And this is where we can get into Cornelia's knights again, Darlton and Guilford specifically, the 2 he manipulates with Geass to kind of set, like backup conditions. With Darlton, where he throws his spear through Cornelia, and then Lelouch is able to use Geass on her from there. He had to get her into that situation. He had to know that she would leave the battle to come confront him. She had to read him. He had to plan for that. He had to make sure the battle stayed away from that area. A lot of things go into using Darlton right there than just telling him, okay, you're going to fight for me now. I have Geassed you. Same thing with Guilford, where he's able to free himself from Schneisel by giving the pose there. He had to set that backup condition, which is a smart thing to do, to say, if I get into shit, I know that they're going to have this guy around. He's a very good soldier. I'll use him to set a backup condition. He also had to watch his actions, make sure he didn't strike that pose at any time through accident. He had to make sure it was clear enough, remember exactly how he showed it to him. A lot of things have to be manipulated to be right, even when he has used Geass on someone. I still think that Geass is limited in certain ways and can be shown as another extension of his intelligence. It's like to go back to Death Note again, because the comparison is just very easy to draw. If I had picked up the Death Note and tried to do what Light did, I would have got caught immediately. Because you could write different death conditions. You could argue that Light could have gotten away with it if he was less arrogant. I think that's, a big point of Death Note. That's pretty much Light in a nutshell. But I wouldn't have been able to do what Light did. 99% of the population wouldn't have been able to. If I had Geass, it's the same thing. I wouldn't be able to do what Lelouch did. There's still a lot of other things that go into those characters. And now we reach the final point where we can again mitigate some of the plot contrivances. And I think one of the big points of debate, at least for me, about Code Geass is how early was the Zero Requiem? I can't say Requiem. How early was the Zero Requiem planned? I think we can argue that it at least cannot be from Season 1, because Charles rewrites his memories at the beginning or end of Season 1, beginning of Season 2. I don't think we could argue he had the plan before then. I think you could even argue it extends all the way up past him believing Nunnally has died from the Suzaku live firing the Flea, because there's definitely no way he could have planned for all that out and known every condition and all that. That's just plot contrivance. I think the later we argue that the Zero Requiem was planned, we mitigate a lot of that plot contrivance. And to me, I think it comes up more spur of the moment in those final moments after he thinks Nunnally has died, Rollo has sacrificed himself. After that chain of events, I think that's when the Zero Requiem is planned. And I think that is one of the smartest things we can see about him. Because if it was designed and planned in that short of an amount of time, where it's pretty much just him and Suzaku versus the world, that means that prior to that, Lelouch hadn't just set the conditions up to get revenge on his father, or to rid the world of Britannia, or any number of things. He set up the conditions of the world and everything he had planned and everything he put in place so that he could see through any outcome he wanted, because this one is arguably different than what he had planned before. Specifically, again, going back to not only just wanting to make the world a kinder place, wanting to then get rid of Britannia, then his father, then becoming this symbol of hate, Zero Requiem. He was able to manipulate every variable, play every odd, set everything up exactly, specifically right. People, places, events, everything. The state of the world. That he could then execute this action, not spur of the moment, but very much on the spot, not planned as much as it should have been. Because he did the planning for every solution beforehand. And that's what I choose to believe about Lelouch. I think that in trying to read people and trying to manipulate them, in playing the odds a lot of the times, because you can't say exactly what other people are going to do without him using Geass, obviously. So I think what a lot of it becomes is saying, okay, here's 15 outcomes. 10 of them are highly unlikely. We can get rid of those. Now there's 5 left. Here's how likely each of them is. I'm going to plan for each of these 5 situations with a corresponding amount of effort to likelihood going into each one. He had every possible outcome that was, not every possible outcome, every likely outcome ready to be played and manipulated to how he wanted it to be. And I think that extends through all the series. I think that's his power. He plays the odds, he looks at those possibilities, finds the most likely, plays the ones he needs to. I think that's Lelouch's smarts. I think that's his power. And that's why I think, despite the plot contrivances, despite some stupid people around him, despite Geass, Lelouch is still a smart character. It's just shown through some bad writing. Whatever they did when they wrote Code Geass, they were very good at writing one character, kind of bad at everything else. But again, I think a lot of those arguments for saying he's not smart aren't exactly fair, and I hope I was able to convince you here today, or just provide some entertainment if you had already felt the same way I do here, or just give you a different appreciation of something the anime did. So if I did, leave a like down below or a comment letting me know. If I missed anything, or if you have a counter argument I didn't cover here, I'd also love to hear that as well, and get engaged with you down in the comment section below. Also have links to my Discord, Patreon, and Twitter down below. Discord specifically if you want to chat some more stuff like this with anime fans, philosophy, how your day is going, whatever we have it going on down there. Twitter, video announcements, personal life, random memes about anime going on there. And Patreon if you want to get your name at the end of videos. Once we get enough supporters, have some dedicated community Patreon events. And support the channel and make sure I can keep giving you this content you enjoy moving forward. So if you consider any of those, they're linked down below. Subscribe if you want more videos like this. I'm hoping to get up to 2 a week, covering everything in anime from history to philosophy or just the technical aspect of it, like these other great videos on screen right now. But anyway, I'll let you get back on with your day and just say thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.